it is election season, and civil society organization Defend Our Democracy has launched an election watch campaign ahead of the 2024 elections. That launch happened yesterday in Johannesburg. According to the organization, the campaign is centered around active citizenry to ensure the success and integrity of next year's poll. Some of the key commitments include election observing and countering disinformation. Let's get you some analysis, get you more on this campaign. Defend Our Democracy's National Committee member, Rekgotsofetse Chikane, joins us in studio. It's great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. It's timely. It's about 5 months to 6 months to go before the election. And it's difficult to choose from all of the issues that need this active citizenry, right?
Yes.
We've got a lot going on in the country. But I think, you know, I'm just looking at your statement, and I think it's important to just say as a start that going into elections 2024, we have to take a moment to say how far we've come as a country.
Yes. So when we look at the elections since 1994, we've almost taken for granted the idea of the integrity of the elections.
Right.
Right? That after 1994, that all the elections simply run smoothly. Over the last 2 years, civil society as a whole has really been focusing around the integrity of the elections, both in terms of getting people into the voting stations, getting civic education into communities so people are informed voters as well. And a lot of those activities are pre-electoral day activities centered around making that election day as impactful as possible. But in a national election and provincial election, that's going to be highly contested across different provinces where the stakes are higher than most people would have wanted, I guess, and that uncertainty that comes with that. We thought there's also a need for civil society to play a role on the day. Observing during the election as an organization is not something fundamentally new. The IEC has constantly accredited organizations to become observers. In fact, they've encouraged civil society to play their part. What Election Watch is trying to do with DOD is the idea of how do you create a coordinated domestic civil society observation mission of sorts. How do you get civil society that's been fighting and has been doing so much work over the last 2 years to make sure that we protect this democracy, function on the day that it's most important, where democracy is truly tested. And Election Watch is open to all organizations and volunteers to essentially say, how do you play your part on that particular day to make sure no incident goes unreported at a voting station, to make sure that the integrity of the elections are protected on that particular day, and to make sure that everything runs smoothly. And I think it's an important role that every single South African organization should be playing.
And is it a role that we should be playing even in these months building up to elections? The behavior of political parties as we go into the poll, it is, by all accounts, the most contested election, the most important election in our country's history since 1994, right? And the behavior of certain political parties, I'm going to go with what was in the news just this week around the African National Congress, with 2 of its senior members accused of blurring that line between party and state and using state-funded things, events, responsibilities to now say that, you know, the ANC is doing what it can, keeping its promises to the people. Are those the kinds of things as well that we want to be keeping an eye on?
So the biggest electoral observation group in the country, outside of the IEC themselves, would actually be political parties and party observers who are actually in voting stations. The only kind of but the problem you create, and I haven't used this phrase in a while, but it's asking the turkeys to vote for Christmas, essentially. There's an inherent bias there, which is why you get international organizations that come in to say, as an independent voice, how do we observe? And I think it's vitally important in this situation that South Africa is walking into, in an election that's going to be as contested, where we've seen previous incidences at voter registration spots where party officials were fighting with each other. The brilliant thing about it was the police were quickly deployed to certain places, is about how to make sure that you have an independent voice who doesn't have a vested interest in the game, who comes into the voting station as a non-partisan observer to ensure that even I can hold the political party observers who are not working within their mandate accountable, and where incidences happen, because we want to work very closely with the IEC, that we report those incidences straight to the IEC as well.
But none of us here in South Africa are those independent observers.
Yeah, well,
we all have a vested interest.
So one of the key things that if you want to join, and hopefully everyone registers onto our system, when you register as an observer with the IEC, there's extensive training that you are given as well around how to behave, what your roles and duties and responsibilities are as an organization within a voting station in particular, that you can't come in and mess up the process yourself. So we will be doing work alongside the IEC around accreditation and training. We'll be doing work along other organizations around training of our individuals, as well as organizations that sign up onto the system. I have to stress this point that DOD by ourselves can't do this by ourselves, right? The whole purpose around this is citizens who say that they wake up in the morning and they want to ask themselves, what can I do for this country today, right? On election day, outside of just casting my vote, what else can I do to make sure that this country that I love, this democracy that I want to protect, is protected, and the work that gets put into that of making sure that you're the person who can call out those who want to interfere with the elections or incidences that might deny someone that vote.
Now, I asked you the question about, whether this extends to the next 6 months, the period before election. Does it?
Yes. So between now, as we launched yesterday, we're encouraging organizations and individuals to register onto our system so that we can then begin training our individuals, as well as if a volunteer signs on, we then redistribute them towards an organization, and they're starting the work of distributing individuals to particular voting stations.
So the training begins well before election day. But what I'm asking is, does the sort of election behavior observation, does that take place even in the build-up to election day, not only on election day?
So on voting registration day, if the second one is announced by the IEC, we're going to be testing out our systems for the first time to make sure voting registration processes are done. There are 2 other organizations working around voter observation in particular who are focusing on pre-electoral activities such as parallel voter tabulation, which happens afterwards, and making sure that the voters' roll is A-OK. Our focus as DOD and Election Watch is particularly the week before elections, because there are special votes that get casted, and then on the day of elections, and then when the polling stations are closed, the voter tabulation of making sure that what is reported at a particular station is the same number that's reported at a district and at a provincial level before it gets to the nationals. IEC's rock.
Some of the other important issues in the build-up to this election will be things like disinformation. It'll be things like education, making sure that you know what you need to know before you actually go in and cast your ballot. Is that part of what you're hoping to achieve here as well?
So that's what we're hoping to achieve, especially with our observers in particular, about what they should be looking for. So one of the important things is, if someone reports that there's an incident in a particular area, there really has to be the strong effort about communicating amongst all observers as well as the IEC to validate that, essentially, say, is that incident true or not, also with the help of the media as much as possible. And I think that's a role that the IEC is really looking for citizens to do. So in previous elections, and this will be the same for the next elections, the IEC will open up portals, whether it's a hotline, whether it's a WhatsApp bot, that citizens can communicate with themselves. Well, a citizen can communicate, right, but just because I notice something or I see something doesn't necessarily mean you can believe them. And this is that role of why you need observers. Around, if an observer in our system notices something, then we need to triangulate those findings through different mechanisms and different incident escalation procedures that we're building as we currently speak.
And just given how many voting stations we're going to be having, we're going to need a lot of hands on deck. So there's about 23,000 voting stations expected for next year. And we are looking for a sample of making sure that 5,000 of those are covered across the country.
Our primary focus for next year's elections would be the Western Cape, Gauteng, and KZN. The idea is Election Watch is not just for this election, but it's that first gambit to essentially say, how do we then expand this for 2026 and 2029 going forward? Incredibly important story. Thank you for coming into studio. Rekgotsofetse Chikane is the National Committee member of Defend Our Democracy, and this issue of active citizenry as we build up to elections 24 is already proving to be a big one.